Questions, comments? Yes, Jeremy.
What kind of preparation do you find makes a good learning engineer?
Right now, there is almost no systematic preparation that fully targets this. And as with so many areas of expertise, it turns out the research and expertise says if you burn in the wrong stuff, you can't get rid of it. So there are some issues around highly experienced instructional designers who have the wrong models because their instincts when they're working at pace, which is the definition of working at scale in the real world, it's really hard. So, working with people who have an excitement around doing systematic, measurable performance improvements, folks who've had experience in classrooms working with students, folks who are not so far down the track of a lot of instructional design experience that it's going to be a battle for them. These are all good substrates in which to work. And I actually wish there were more learning engineering programs out in the field. There is one that's like that up at Carnegie Mellon. It's called METALS, I think it is. It's the Masters in Education Technology and Learning Science. I think I got it. And they actually talked to Kaplan about the structure and program of what they were doing to try to figure out what would make it be practical for people who want to do this work at scale, and that's one of them. But they don't graduate. I mean, it's like a dozen a year, a couple of dozen a year. It's not at scale. Interesting, there's a really cool thing that just started last year. I just saw them announced now publicly. It's called Deans for Impact. Have any of you heard of this, Deans for Impact? And it's a really interesting group because they got a group of like several dozen deans of schools of education who are committing together that they are going to use evidence-based methods, learning science, measures of their teaching performance to drive real performance. And they published actually a nice manifesto of what teachers should know about learning science to actually work well with their kids, which was actually quite decent. I thought it was actually quite decent for what it's worth. The funny thing is, and I was talking to somebody about this earlier, they don't seem to realize what it sounds like to say, by gosh, we are now committed to teaching teachers how students learn. Finally, we don't care what anyone else is doing, but that's what we're doing. What's been going on for the last 70 years behind the closed doors? But I think it's great. It is great, and it's going to be really hard because that's not what the experienced faculty in schools of education have done. And they're people, and they got expertise driven in, and this is going to be hard. But it's exactly the kind of stuff that needs to happen so that we start to have more sources of people who come into education and learning starting from a standpoint that's driven by learning science. It's a little bit like, young MDs come in to school with English backgrounds, music backgrounds, and all that. They had an intense exposure to biological sciences. So when they come out, they have that for the rest of their careers as a frame in which they can actually evaluate what's going on. Imagine if the ed tech landscape was flooded with ex-teachers who deeply understood the work of Sweller and Clark and Mayer and Dweck and all these people. You'd have a totally different set of products coming out of the place up the way or all around you here than you have right now. That would be really exciting. So,
we have a couple questions from the web.
Okay.
The first question from Jen Groff: does learning engineering need to take place while working in live classrooms?
Does it need? It should, but it's different, right? So there's two different aspects. Just like in medicine, right? There's two different aspects of how you can use evidence-based care. So one is the design of the experience before you get the class, and that can be done by the teacher too. All of this stuff applies to chalk and talk. It's not just technology, right? Then there's the other piece of how do you use it actually in the classroom. So there's actually a pretty interesting volume by a guy named Doug Levin, I think his name is, Teach Like a Champion. Do you know that? It's a really cool book built on his video-based observations of how do teachers in K through 12 classrooms work, the best ones, how do they do so well with students who shouldn't be able to learn as well as they do? How do they do that? And when you look at the 40-some behaviors that he's untangled, at least half of them end up being linked to learning science, cognitive science elements around remove distractions, around force people to finish their thoughts, make them finish the practice, drive their neurons to completion, and so forth. Now, he knows nothing about the learning science stuff. He just did it observationally. But you can see this is like a handbook of applying learning science directly in classroom performances, which I think is actually pretty cool. So it's both sets of things. And for those who are here, I'm around, so I mean, if you guys want to hang, it's fine, but just that maybe we can finish one more.
Yeah, so I do have one question that was submitted before the webinar started. Can you characterize the existing specific career possibilities or forecast specific emerging career opportunities for the field of learning engineering?
Oh, I think it's vast. You know, if you think about it expansively, just as the way we were talking about it a minute ago, teachers in the future, you could think of, they are potentially flavors of practicing learning engineers. They're like the folks in the field. I mean, that's it. And then all the way in the back of publishing, creating new materials. Publishers know nothing about learning science typically. They just haven't had to over centuries, really. And so they don't have folks doing this. And they're beginning to pick some folks up. There's beginning to be interest in this. Then there's, of course, purchasing pieces, work for folks who are buying materials or environments at scale. We don't have folks who are evaluating learning environments, training environments for teachers or faculty using a lens of learning science. So having learning engineers involved with purchasing processes, involved with regulatory processes, setting up, well, what are the right kinds of data to collect to determine that things are actually working well? And again, venture capital firms, think how differently a venture capitalist evaluates an ed tech product from a biotech product. Every biotech product always gets a biology scientist scan, at least one, not involved with the original research, to say, do you buy this? Is this stuff actually going to work in the field? And I've had this conversation with venture capitalists. And the amazing thing is, they never ask learning scientists to vet the next ed tech investment. Oh, look, it's cool. There's a teacher involved. It must be great. Here's $500,000. And it's like, what? You don't even know if it could possibly work, right? And so there's another whole area of being involved with gating investments and setting up conditions within investments, exciting investments, so that we quickly winnow out the ones that can't possibly work based on learning science, based on how learning works. Look, if you're going right at a tree, you're going to hit the tree whether you have your eyes open or closed, right? So open the eyes is the key thing. So many, many, many different areas,
Thank you. We are going to have to close our online session now. We'll continue an informal discussion here. For those online, the presentation and our Q&A session and the Twitter transcript will all be available at circlecenter.org. And the Twitter conversation will continue. So thank those of you who joined us from the ether, and we'll continue our discussion.
So please, go ahead. You want to pick? You might as well keep the mic going, yeah.
So my question is about, it kind of goes back to what you pulled out from the Pittsburgh Science and Learning Center, that, the category of facts and so on. And my question is, where does the social component come in? I didn't hear you talk about social learning at all.
So there's a lot of ways to think about that. One way to think about it is, if you have some explicit goals to teach students how to work with each other or work in groups or teams, then those become procedural goals potentially. They become their own goals, and you create a learning environment and a set of experiences to actually get at that. The social environment becomes places where a variety of these conversations about gray areas can happen, where you can talk about, well, platypus, mammal or reptile, what's up? So the social process of sharing reasoning for these kinds of, especially the complicated stuff around processes or principles, That's a piece of it to understand people's reasoning and so forth. The other part of this, of course, is in the motivation side. I have to find the motivation side, which is, here it is, which is when you think about how do you find something valuable. Well, one of the ways is because of the social environment and the way others around you are seeing value in what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so that becomes a really important part of the motivation set. And similarly, solutions to other parts of this is then other folks who are further along than you, who shared your view at the time. They are terrific sources of explanations of why, no, you can do this, or I thought it wasn't valuable either, but look where I am now, and the only reason I can do this is because I paid attention, I made use of it, and so forth. So there's a social dimension that ties into the whole motivation side too. So I see the social part of this is one of those effectors, one of those tie-ins that ranges all the way across this. So.
Hi, I was fascinated when you said you were working across all these many different levels
Yes.
of learning and education, and you wanted to use one common approach. Here's my question. As you have been studying across these many different areas, I want you to talk a little bit about maybe what's similar and what is different between two areas in particular, K-12 learning and corporate. K-12, college, and corporate context of learning.
Yep. So I used to do quite a lot of work in K-12 when I helped start the virtual education company K-12 Inc. We don't do so much in K-12 at Kaplan anymore, but we do a bunch in corporate, we do a bunch in universities. And they are all very different. The K through 12 work, interestingly, in some ways, is further along in having an evidence base and a focus on systematic data gathered about outcomes. Now, it's controversial and people are screaming at each other about it and it's all of that, but it is absolutely on the table being discussed and frankly being generated, badly in some cases, but there it is. The other key thing about K through 12 is, this will sound funny, but there are folks who are full-time employed at trying to make students successful, which is not the case in higher ed. Okay, so that's a key thing as well. The regulatory burden in K through 12 is high and different than higher ed. So that's a piece. And of course the financing thing is peculiar. I mean, between the public utility aspect, public side, there are these really interesting private ventures and the charter school side that I think actually allows the K through 12 world to become a very interesting experiment tank. And there are some of these charter school networks like Achievement First and Uplift and Match academies up in Boston, and I'm sure there are others, who are actually getting quite interested in how does learning science affect what they do, how do we get measures to go, how do we assess, and I think that's all to the good. So that's actually powerful. Higher ed is really a tangle because there are all different kinds of players in higher ed, right? So we do a lot of work in higher ed, and so we're a very different animal than Stanford is, or than University of Michigan is, right? So you don't come to Kaplan as a faculty member on your way to a Nobel Prize. I mean, we don't cover any of the topics that you can get a Nobel Prize in, for example. But also, our thing is only teaching. It's just students and student success. We don't have the concept of tenure in the same way at all. It's not like that, right? But many higher ed institutions at scale and with real reputations, there's such an important focus on research, productivity, and outcomes. All the young faculty are basically told, you've got to focus on this. That's the only way to succeed. And the result is there's a whole cultural ethos around student success in higher education that makes it almost a hobby. Well-meaning hobby. Everybody loves their hobbies, but not the deep, systematic target of success. Because I got to work on my research. And so the key is not to have pitchforks outside of my office. But other than that, it's like, well, I like working with students, and I like doing this, but is this going to take another hour? Because I got to get back to the lab, right? And I don't know if you can tell, but this is hard work. I mean, I got a bunch of full-time people doing this work, and it's really hard work. So to have people, even people way smarter than me, only spending fractions of their time on student success, or even, frankly, measuring student success. Think about the biology course, intro biology course, right? Very few of those students are going to become research biologists. Yet either that's kind of the focus of the biology faculty member, or his evil goal that he brags about at the faculty club is to knock out 2/3 of the students because he's really a part of the medical school admissions process, right? Well, neither of those is actually terribly effective for the long-term paths. So how would you ever reward a biology faculty member for following his cohorts of 1,000 students at a time out 6 years to see, did my course make a difference to their careers? Were they able to use what I taught them? Because it might be, for some of them, one of their only science courses. Not everybody keeps doing pre-med stuff. So can I see the impact of scientific reasoning and decision-making on how they think 6 years later? Well, how would you reward a biology faculty member for doing what is obvious learning engineering work? I mean, if you said, I really want to understand long-term consequences of my instructional work, yeah, I mean, I'm making it up here, but that's part of it, right? But how are you going to reward the guy? You can't. So I think higher ed has challenges. I do think for-profit, non-regulated trainers, things like Dev Boot Camp, which is actually a part of Kaplan, it's one of those new economy skills training things, nest training things. I do think all of us that are trying these different things with a real focus, we have a major role to play to try to figure out how do you do this better and give examples. I mean, I'd love for Kaplan to be an existence proof of how learning engineering can be done at scale in a way that you can measure and track, and use that to help, others come along and say, well, I guess we got to do something like that. I'll tell you one more story from Australia. Can I keep going a little bit? Is that okay? Stop me when you want to, okay? Sorry?
About 5 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So I was just visiting Australia. We have major operations all across Australia. So I was in Adelaide, at the University of Adelaide, where we're doing some work. And I met with a person there who runs the academics at University of Adelaide. She's the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Academics. So like up here, it doesn't mean she can order anybody around, right? She's got, the faculty work for departments, they got, right? So it's tough, right? But she's embarked, and I think she's successful now. She was about to get the approvals on it. I think she got the approvals. She's setting up a completely parallel track for student success for faculty, where the focus in a chemistry department, biology department, all across the university, that a faculty member would choose to be measured on and focused on student success in that department. And it's a totally parallel track to the research track, and there's also a teaching and learning track, or a teaching and research track that does the combo. So the cultural problem that she was aware of and that she wants to try to fix is the teaching and research track is often the consolation prize for people who are no good at research. And so doing teaching and learning is like a negative in terms of your reputation in the school and the reputation in the university. It's not a good thing. So what she's set up is to say, if you want to become a pure teaching-focused, student success-focused person, you have to start as a fabulous researcher in your domain. No one can join that wing unless you begin by being an absolutely stellar researcher, young researcher. And then if you want to, right, you got to want to, because why wouldn't you just go do research, right? If you want to, you now have a path open that lets you completely focus on student success. And you will get the potted plant in your office if you're good at it. You will get the larger office if you're good at it. You'll get tenure if you're good at it. All the things that you can get. And after 3 to 5 years, just like on the research side, you can shift back over to research. If you decide, I've done my 3 years, you know what, not so exciting, I'm going to go back over to research, you have that option to you. So I think that's cool. Somebody is actually trying to innovate with faculty career paths, and we'll see what happens. But that starting point where she is not allowing it to be a dumping ground for the worst faculty, it'll actually be a collection of the best researchers who will spend some time focused on student outcomes. I just think it's incredibly exciting. I don't know if it'll work, but she says, come back in February. She's hoping to have 50 of these people, and she says, I could help do this kind of thing with them and get them jump-started on what is possible to do. And that's exciting work that needs to happen in the higher education sector, I think, in order for it to become an engine of long-term student success using technology and learning science. So,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
You told that Kaplan has a business unit, Performance Solutions, focused on the corporate market.
Yes.
Are there other players out there that are also targeting corporate that are really focused on and dedicated to become learning engineering?
Not so much. And if any of you know of any, please tell me, because I'd love to collaborate with them, because whether it's internal corporate training or external consultants around this, or folks who design materials for this for corporations, honestly, it's very much, a historical, a guild-like thing where people use their own biases and intuitions to generate and do things. And, smile sheets rule the evaluation of corporate training. That's what you do. You send around these things. And it's just awful, I think. And finally, and you will see this written up all over the place, human resources groups and professionals are very frustrated because they don't know how to demonstrate return on investment. And what happens is, honestly, and it's crazy, you have all the blah-de-blah about our people are our most important asset, yada, 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 right? And then you look at how it's actually budgeted in companies. It's just like charity and sports. 3% for charity, 3% for sports, 3% for training. What does it do? I don't know, but we got to do it. But only about 3%, right? Well, that's not how you do an investment. An investment is, I'm putting this in, show me a productivity gain, show me a reduction in errors, show me a reduction in sales cycles, show me something that matters. And that's what we're trying to do. And honestly, the CFOs and CEOs of businesses are finding us very strange to talk to, so this is going to be a slow build. Because I kid you not, we walk in and we say crazy things like, look, we don't want to charge you for our training time at all, not a dime. We're going to build it for you. We're going to do the cognitive task analysis, we'll build the evidence-based training, and then we're going to run a valid randomized controlled trial against the outcomes that you say are the most important to the bottom line of your company, and all we want is a fraction of the value your company goes up at the end of it. Well, why wouldn't that be the right measure, right? Because it's an investment. If we can lift the value of $1 billion company by 10%, by improving how their sales force and their frontline, project managers work, that's $100 million they could not have gotten any other way. And they're used to doing that kind of calculation. They say, oh, geez, yeah, we'd give you 10 million for that, or 15 or something, sales tax anyway, because you couldn't have gotten any other way. And we're like, thank you very much. But this is not how training is bought or sold or designed. So these guys are looking at us like, you got two heads, man. Because if it works, it may cost them way more than the butts and seats approach. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't cost them a dime. But they're kind of thinking, yeah, but that's cool. So that means you only succeed if we actually succeed. Wait, that's not how training works. It's like, yes, it's how it should work. Walk with us outside for a moment. Breathe for a moment that we can do this, okay? It's really hard. It's funny, but these are people, right? And, they have been doing things a certain way for a long time, and we're trying to rock their worlds with what is possible. And the research on cognitive task analysis and its associated evidence-based training things is very clear. You can actually do this all day long. It's just hard, and it's expensive. This is the final point I'll make is the Industrial Revolution has not come to education, right? Elon Musk started his Tesla car company, 5-6 years ago. Everyone said, and he said, oh, I need $500 million, $500 million of tooling. Yeah, everybody says, oh, you can't even get out the first car unless you have $500 million spent on thinking and tooling and all that kind of stuff, right? That's the Industrial Revolution, right? Have you ever tried to get $5 million to build an algebra course? It's really hard. But how much more important is a little sports car than fixing algebra in America, right? And it's because we don't have the decades-long system, because Henry Ford didn't spend the equivalent of $500 million either. He built off carriages, right? But over time, they thought more and more up front, did more and more tooling, and got better quality and lower production costs. Better for business, let's do that again. Same thing in pharmaceuticals, same thing in lots of areas. We haven't even begun that set of cycles. And I do think technology is a part of this. You got to spend a lot more up front on technology before you can start delivering. But if we get the cycles going correctly with evidence and measures, we can begin demonstrating how increasingly smart, intense thought up front gets you better results, maybe at lower variable costs down the line. So I'm very excited. This is the start of the Industrial Revolution for education, I think. So.
Thank you. I think we'll have to end here and try to find you some lunch.
Oh, great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Don.
Thank you.